Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome back to Fires from Nilfgaard, Episode 2, The Ashburg Detectives. Delcay, the barkeeper, led the group away from his tavern through the muddy streets of Ashburg until they reached what appeared to be just another house. Delcay knocked on the door a couple of times, and then waited. A short time later, a thin, reedy elf opened the door and looked at them. "Yes, Delcay?" The elf said simply. Delcay smiled largely, and possibly falsely. "Thank you, Aaron." He gestured back at the group behind him. "These people are here to look at the dead bodies. I've hired them to help us figure out what is going on." Aaron looked at the group behind Delcay and pursed his lips. After a moment, he stood aside. "Come in, then." He looked impatient for everyone to enter his house, which, except for Delcay, they quickly did, seeing the look on his face. Once they were all in, Delcay bade them goodbye, and Aaron shut the door behind Delcay. He then led them to a staircase that led down to a cellar. "This way, if you would." They were brought into a room that, although the floor was dirt, was clearly kept clean. On a large table in the middle of the room lay 5 bodies. Culmast and Runderin rather quickly went up to the bodies and began to look them over. Culmast using his experience in battle to inform what he was seeing, and Runderin using her medical skills. Culmast began talking first. They were all beaten to death, no obvious cutting or stabbing wounds. Runderin nodded her assent. It looks like they died of internal organ failure. "I would guess that they were made by a large object, probably shaped like a club." Culmast continued, scratching the growth of hair on his cheek as he looked at the bruises. Runderin again picked up where Culmast left off. "These bruises were inflicted by a weapon at least 1 meter long and half a meter wide, and vertically ribbed." Looking over at Culmast, she noticed he seemed to be at the edge of what he could deduce from the bodies. The strength needed for these patterns are far beyond what a human could ever inflict. It'd be like being trampled by a horse whose hooves were 1 meter long and half a meter wide, and a horse that was big enough that those would be normal-sized hooves for it. Gwenifer stepped forward toward the two. "Is that all you can tell?" Culmast walked around the bodies one more time and shrugged. Runderin nodded. "Yes, that is all I can see. I doubt there is more to learn from these corpses. And what we did learn was confusing, to say the least." Aaron started talking as it was clear that everything was done here. "All 5 bodies were found in their homes at sunrise. Their doors had been broken open, the victims beaten to death, and their children taken. The guards have yet to catch the criminal, though extra patrols have been posted." At this point, he stepped forward with a sigh. "I can take you to the scene of the most recent incident, if you wish." It was clear that he didn't actually want to take them, but he wanted the criminal to be caught, and Delcay did say that these people would solve their problem. "Yes, if you'd please take us there. I believe we've learned all we will from here," Gwenifer said. Aaron cocked his head slightly as he heard her talk, but didn't say anything as he ushered them all back upstairs and out the door. Walking through the muddy streets of the small town once again, Aaron led them to an example of the larger of the 2 designs of houses that seemed to permeate the town. This one was on the very edge of town. When they got close enough to see details, Culmast half drew his sword in surprise as he realized that not only was the door broken, but the doorframe itself was also cracked and forced away from the space the door would hang, as if something much larger than the hole had forced its way through. They cautiously entered the house and clearly heard someone in what they assumed was the bedchamber area. In fact, it seemed to be several someones. Each member of Gwenifer's company drew their weapons just as 5 clawed-up men stepped out of the bedchamber. "Shove off!" the presumed leader yelled. "We earned this loot, running off those plowing midgets." Runderin stepped forward and made a show of setting her djembayah on the ground and holding her hands up. "Fine, fine, that's fine. We aren't here to take any loot. We're just here to try to figure out what happened. What are you doing here?" This seemed to calm them, at least a little bit, as they lowered their weapons, but didn't set them down like she had. Merely stopped actively being ready. The leader began to speak up again. "Come to rob the place. You know, dead uns don't need their things. But was these plowing ugly midget things crawling round the place. Figured we'd run 'em off, but horrid things bit off me finger. And Herman's nose. Seems like they were looking for something to eat. Ran 'em off good, and they scampered for the hills." "Good," Gwenifer said, as she raised her crossbow back up and shot at the leader. No one expected the sudden attack as the bolt tore into the bandit leader's stomach as he screamed in pain and fell to the ground in short-lived agony. As everyone stood there shocked at what Gwenifer did, she rushed forward, drawing her djembayah, leaving her crossbow behind. The bandit she had decided to attack tried to parry, but he clumsily brought up his iron sword. She redirected her thrust to slip under his arm and hit him hard in the ribs, tearing a large gash. She heard ribs crack as he screamed in pain and stumbled backward. She quickly turned and slashed at another bandit. Her blade sunk deep into his chest, and as she pulled it out, he looked down in horror and tried to suck in a breath before collapsing. Runderin picked her djembayah up and rushed after her leader. Her first strike was parried by the bandit. She went for a second strike, going low, striking at his leg. He hopped backward, yelping at the deep cut. Her medical eye noticed a bit of his clothing was now missing from the spot she'd sliced. That wound would fester and get infected if he were alive long enough for nature to take his course, though she seriously doubted he would be. Culmast walked forward and slashed hard at the uninjured bandit. He knew that Gwenifer's success was due to luck more than anything else, and he needed to end this fight as quickly as he could. He brought his sword down in a downward slice with all his might and powered through the weak resistance of the iron sword that was brought up against him. His sword found the skin at the bottom of the bandit's ribs and sliced deep into the stomach, causing him to fall back. With only 2 bandits left, Adalbert brought his battle axe against the one Runderin had been facing. The axe swung in a low arc at the man's right leg. Adalbert saw by the awkward way the sword was positioned and how the bandit responded to the contact that his arm must have at least sprained as the axe made contact with the leg. Not that the sprain mattered much. Adalbert's axe made solid contact with the man's calf, and a spray of blood let everyone know a major artery was hit, and the man couldn't keep his feet. Adalbert then walked over to the first bandit that Gwenifer had attacked with her knife and put him out of his misery before anything else could happen. Let's look around the house and see what we can find out, Adalbert said simply as he wiped the blade of his axe clean with the shirt of the man he had just killed. Only he and Culmas seemed to move at first. It figured. They were the two former soldiers. There's blood in a few places here, Adalbert pointed out. As Runderin came over to check it out, she added, "It was probably made by the face of one of the bodies. It matches the rough shape. I'm sure we could go get it and test it out, but I don't think we really need to." Adalbert continued as he noticed Culmas checking something out in the storage area. "Okay, so whatever this thing is, it's big enough to break the door frame. How the hell does something that big sneak past the guards?" Gwenifer shook her head. "I've no idea. I'm not sure if it does." As she was finishing up, Culmas walked back into the main room. "I found two things. Firstly, there are drag marks, as though a body was removed from here. There are tracks out back that lead toward the hills. Secondly, he bent down and picked something small up. There are bits of twigs and small sticks scattered about this room, and only this room. I think it'd be safe to surmise that the fighting probably took place here. A couple of these twigs have blood on them." He looked at Runderin. "I think we're looking for some sort of club made out of branches or something." Runderin's eyes went wide. I think we're dealing with a troll." Thank you so much for listening to the second episode of Fires from Nilfgaard. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for the next episode of the Monster Manual Backward, where we cover a bird that I forgot last time, and the boar and the giant boar. Thank you.